Welcome to the Happy Mindset, episode number 92. Today's episode is called Flow Speaking. So today I'm joined by Dave Rock. Dave is a flow speaker, coach, and an author. On today's episode, Dave talks about creativity. He talks about self-expression. I liked talking to Dave. He's got experience in the writing side of things and the speaking side of things. The distinction that comes up in the episode is how Dave sees flow in writing and flow in speaking. I quite liked the distinction or the difference he sees in his mind, how he articulated it. And I learned quite a bit from this episode. Some of the questions Dave talked about too was very interesting when it came to inspiration as a writer and a creator. I think a lot of people, when they think about inspiration, they think about like needing to feel good and feel inspired and then you write. Whereas Dave talks about what actually is in the way of that inspiration to begin with, which I think is actually more valuable to focus on. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks again for listening, and I'll speak to you soon. Okay, so thanks for joining us today, Dave.
Thank you.
So my first question is, who are you and what are you doing in the world today?
I have no idea how to answer the first question.
Difficult one.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you can list off a load of job descriptions, right? Or like, identity labels, like I'm a this and a that. I really don't know. And I'm not just saying that because it might sound, philosophically or spiritually cool. It is the most honest answer I can give when I ask myself, who am I? I get a big blurry mosaic of images and emotions and sensations and, open-ended answers that mutate and change every single day. The best I can really say is that I am this thing which has all of these experiences and which cares, which cares about all the things it cares about. And I have a whole set of ideas about who I am and places I get stuck and places where life is beautiful and easy for me and places where it's miserable and frustrating. But none of it seems to stay very still. And I couldn't say that I could sum up any of it or make any real sense out of it.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess the easier question is, what are you doing today?
Yeah, so for the last 10 years, I have been helping other people to find ways to sustainably live whatever gifts they have to give to the world. So finding ways to live their gifts in their real lives as the people that they really are, finding simple, small steps, finding a natural stretch for themselves. So helping people to become the teachers they feel they were born to be, or the speakers they feel they were born to be, or the actors or storytellers or comedians or singers or the writers they feel they were born to be. I really love to help people unscramble all of the expectations and airbrushed images we have about what creativity means and help them to drop into realizing how completely intrinsic it is to being human. I believe everyone is born gifted. I think the world is overflowing with talent. I think like the really meaningful question for all of us is not, do I have something to give? It's not, do I have a special talent? The question is, how can I find a sustainable, healthy way to live the gifts that I do have? So for 8 years, I've been 10 years, for around 10 years, I've been teaching workshops in all of those things in lots of different ways. I've also been coaching people. And I've also been doing spoken word gigs and storytelling and writing stories, which is really, that's what ticks my own personal boxes and lights my own personal bulbs the most. And right now I'm pulling back a bit from teaching and I am mostly helping other people write their books and writing some of my own.
Can you tell us a bit about spoken word? What is that?
Yeah, spoken word is poetry in any form or shape, which is created with the intention of being shared aloud, alive with human beings in the room. So on any given night, spoken word might look a little bit like hip hop or like comedy or like traditional poems or like something completely unlike anything else. but it's poetry that has rhythm and rhyme and soul and is created with the awareness that it's meant to be said aloud, shared aloud with other people in the moment.
How does somebody develop that rhythm and that soul and that flow to the spoken word?
Yeah, I don't think we need to develop any of those things. I mean, human beings are born with rhythm, right? We've got heartbeat, we've got breath, we've got circadian rhythm, we've got ultradian rhythm. Our bodies have hundreds of different rhythms all the time. We do have to maybe remember how to drop back into it. And the same with soul. I mean, we're all born with this huge depth of feeling. And I think we're all born with this huge gift to express ourselves in ways that can touch the hearts and the minds of other people too. And if anything, we just have to drop our ideas of how we think that that should look and sound in order to come back to ourselves, to tune into what's inside of us right now and give ourselves permission to let that out. And then the soul and the rhythm and the flow can really take care of themselves.
Mm. How do we
Does that
start?
make
Yeah, no, it
fun?
makes perfect sense. Yeah, but it's in practice can be a bit more difficult.
Yeah,
The ideas, how do we start letting go of the ideas we have of how something should be or how we should be?
yeah, great. That's a good question. There are lots of different things to do, obviously, but I think one of the simplest things that I could recommend to most of us, I feel like most people, including myself still some of the time, we're suffering from a kind of buildup of unexpressed stuff most of the time. You know, we're walking around biting our lips, bottling back frustrations, bottling back desires, bottling back scary or uncomfortable things that we might feel like we need to say. And so if there comes a moment where we feel like it's really important to express ourselves and we want to do it well, whether that's like just being in a meeting or giving a presentation or being on a date or being on a stage to do spoken word or anything like that, in any situation where the moment feels charged and we feel like we really want to bring the best of ourselves and do justice to the moment, then all the pressure of all of that unsaid stuff and the stuckness, maybe if you will, of the fact that we spend so much of our time really like holding ourselves back, it makes it hard to be in flow. And so the first thing I would say to most people is, if you want to get more confident in expressing yourself, and if you want to start accessing some more of that inspiration and that naturalness, the first thing to do, make a bit of time on a regular basis to just talk off the top of your head when you're alone. So have you heard of like free writing, like morning pages?
Yeah, like like unfiltered writing, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. So you can do the same thing with speaking out loud. You just set a timer for say like 5 minutes and just say to yourself, I'm going to just try and say everything that's in my head off the top of my head in the next 5 minutes. Now, it might sound quite weird for some people. And you might end up saying some stuff that can be quite, you know, you could surprise yourself even. There might be some, you might end up noticing that you're angry or sad about something that you didn't even realize. Or you might notice that you really want something that you didn't realize you wanted. But the experience of doing that over and over again, day after day, it can release all of the stuckness and the built up emotional pressure we have from biting our lips. And it can also, what it does is um, it nurtures those synaptic connections in the brain for allowing a flow of words to come easily and naturally. So it's like, first of all, you blow off all the steam of all the stuff you've been holding on to. So like you're going to say like your heart and your mind are clear, but then also it creates that pathway and that capacity to be able to really speak freely in any situation. That's the simplest thing that anyone can do and the most powerful, I think.
Mm. Well, sounds good. I might actually try that because I do writing and stuff, but I've never actually done that. I don't think.
Yeah, I
Question
haven't
for,
heard of anyone else who's teaching that practice so far. I mean, I invented it myself. I'm sure there probably are other people in the world doing it.
yeah, that makes
Um,
sense. Makes
yeah,
sense, and I can see how it would develop the pathways in your brain as well to actually get better at that as well.
yeah.
The question that occurs to me is that were you always in touch with your flow state and your creativity, or do you remember a time where you were stuck yourself?
Mm. I mean, I have a time when I'm stuck, you know, at least a couple of times a week, still, for sure. I think we all do. And I've had times in my life where it felt much harder. than it does now, that's for sure. I think we're all born with an effortless ability to be creative, and that does get educated out of us, as we grow up. And what I've really learned is if I'm feeling uninspired creatively, if I think that I'm blocked, then it's probably that I'm not allowing myself to create the things I really need to. So let's say I want to write a really inspiring speech, but I don't feel inspired. Maybe it's because I actually have to write down something really angry first. Maybe it's because I have to tell an uncomfortable story that I don't really want to tell. Or maybe it's because instead of being inspiring, I actually just want to be really silly. Maybe I just want to be funny at some point in my life, at some moment in time. And so saying no to the things that are actually there in that moment, it blocks the flow. And it means that inspirational speech or whatever else it is, it might not come. So there's been times in my life where, maybe for long periods, I wasn't allowing myself to create what I really wanted to create. I wasn't allowing myself to write what I really wanted to write. And I didn't even realize that I was doing that. It's an unconscious thing. It was just that I had such a strong idea in my head of what poetry should look like, or what kind of image I should present to the world of myself. And so for as long as I wasn't allowing myself to actually allow out the things that were there, I was completely shut down. I've had, months, I've had years where that's been the case. And now it's much more like there's just a subtle fluctuation where day by day I might shift into feeling that sense of being stuck and uninspired. And then I have to just slow down. And I ask myself, if I'm writing my memoir or I'm writing nonfiction, I ask myself, what stories want to be told through me right now? And I don't necessarily need an answer. It's just asking the question. It's telling my consciousness, my unconscious mind, what I want. And then I ask myself, what parts of myself want to come through in the story right now? Maybe does my weird sense of humor want to be allowed out more? Or does some of my heartbreak about things want to be allowed out more, for example? And then sometimes I ask myself, what else wants to come through? Which just makes space for anything that I might not have thought of. And if I ask myself those questions often enough, over and over again, it means that I'm at least listening for anything that I might otherwise unconsciously censor. And I'm making space for those things to come through. And when I let those things come through, the inspiration is pretty much always on tap.
So was it those deliberate questions that started to break through that unconscious thing that was holding you back before that?
Well, I've had loads of experiences in my life where I've realized that things I was ashamed of or judged were actually totally okay. Like different kinds of healing workshops, therapies, reading inspirational books. So, I think most of us have that. Hopefully, we have these moments in our lives where maybe there's a part of ourselves that we were always trying to hide from other people, and other people see it and they actually love it. And you go, oh, wow, maybe this silly, weird bit of me is actually totally okay. So I think we all have experiences like that. And having experiences like that, it taught me to search for those things inside of myself and to find ways to let them out. And then everything I've learned about creativity through, what is it now? Just about 28 years of writing pretty much nonstop. And then being on stage and teaching nonstop for the last 10 years or so. It's also shown me whenever I am stuck, it's because there's something there that I'm unconsciously not allowing through. And so from learning that, I started to use the questions.
Do you meditate or anything like that?
Sometimes. Yeah, I'm not very good at sticking to things.
Okay. Actually, you're writing some books at the moment, and you're actually writing them in tandem. Can you explain why you did? Is it that something that just naturally occurred, or was it a conscious decision that you made before you started writing?
Yeah. Probably a bit of it's like an addiction to just having too many ideas at once, which is, it's something I'm working on. I've never been very good at doing one thing at a time. But it's also, so I'm writing a memoir, it's the story of my life. And it uses Celtic mythology, and it uses my spoken word, and it uses all of the latest findings from neuroscience and science around trauma and around consciousness and flow states and creativity and love. So I'm looking at how all of those things have played out in my life and what I've learned about them and what I've learned through teaching thousands of people and coaching hundreds of people. And the book is about my struggle, my experiences of living my gifts and forgetting how to live my gifts and remembering again. And it's weaving all those different things through it together. So it's quite complicated. It's difficult to write because it's not like any book that I've read before, so there's no map there to follow. And that's the one that's taking up most of my energy. It's also the most vulnerable, of course, because I talk about having a violence in my childhood, for example, and I talk about my heartbreaks as an adult. But then the other two books are very simple. One is about finding flow in speaking, and the other is about finding flow in writing. And both of those books, they really write themselves if I just make enough time and space for them, because it's just stuff I've been teaching for the last 10 years. So I've said it all thousands of times already. I've practiced it with thousands of people. And really, I just had to find a format, like stepping stones, a skeleton to lay down so that the bones of the book are just all there. And it's almost like it's relaxing writing that compared to the much meatier work of writing out my own life story.
Is there much of a difference between the flow state in speaking and writing?
That's a really interesting question. I guess it depends on a lot of things. I would say most times when most people feel flow in speaking, it's when they're with others. So your flow is coming from your connection to and your relationship to other people and the way that you're interacting with them. Of course, you can get into flow when you're speaking alone, but it's quite rare. And not many people would spend that much time speaking aloud alone. Whereas flow with writing is almost always alone, right? And it comes from really going deep into your imagination, deep into your heart, into the stories or ideas that you have and allowing them to come through you. So there's definitely a lot of the same neurochemicals going on and a lot of the same brainwaves. But I would say, definitely for me at least, flow in speaking is this feeling of like being really plugged into the world around me and being swept up by this wave of inspiration and energy that comes from being connected to people. Whereas flow in writing is about going deep within and seeing what wants to come through.
And what's your idea on quantity versus quality? Do you see one more important than the other, or how do you see it as a creative person?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing to look at. I think we all need to think about it a lot. My friend Jamie Cato, he's also a creativity teacher, and he talks about sometimes how creating works of art is like rolling a 4,000-sided dice. And it's like 3,999 of the things we do are never going to see the light of day. And this is what I've learned for myself, and it's also what I see from nature. And now I'm starting to learn that this is also how it works. Most of the people that we hold up as geniuses, up on the podiums in the minds of the Western world, people like Einstein and Shakespeare, they actually produced huge bodies of work, most of which is pretty much unknown. Like Einstein produced 202 scientific papers, but he's famous for 2 ideas. That doesn't mean that those 200 other papers were failures. It's just that, generally speaking, that's the kind of volume of work you have to produce in order for those moments of absolute genius to come through. And it's also about luck as well, right? I mean, it's like somebody might write 1,000 songs and one of those songs could become famous. It doesn't mean that it's better than the other songs necessarily. There's just something about sometimes some particular work of creativity can catch a wave out in the world. But it does seem that the more we create, the better the chances are that we're going to create something truly amazing. And the more we create, the more chance there is that somehow the world is going to catch on to what we're doing and it's going to take off for us. If you look at the way, for example, a tree will make thousands and thousands of seeds, and only a handful of those actually get to sprout, and only a handful of those actually get to grow. I think it's just the way nature works. Nature is completely generous and effortless with the amount that it gives out. Whereas humans can be quite miserly and obsessive. You might write one book and then spend 10 years trying to get it published when you could have written 10 books in those 10 years. And it might be your fourth or your fifth book that's actually good enough to be put out into the world. But you haven't written it because you're still obsessing over the first one that nobody wanted. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah. How does nature inspire you as a creative person?
I mean, for me, I feel like being in nature reminds me how to be. If I look at a tree or if I look at the ocean, just by giving all of my five senses over to it, I remember that you can be powerful and peaceful at the same time. For example, like the ocean. You know, the ocean is unimaginably strong. And at the same time, there's a kind of like effortless playfulness and peacefulness about it for me, that somehow it helps me. I can feel it soothing my nervous system. I can feel it soothing my brain waves. And it gives me some sense of how I can live in a more effortlessly powerful and graceful way in my own life. If I go and I give it my time and my energy and attention over and over again, it helps me to live from a different place.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that in nature too. Like what you were saying there with the nature will just produce stuff, volume as well, and without worrying about it or fretting or yeah, that's not even a word, fettering, obsessing about it like we do with that
Yeah.
perfectionist tendency. Oh yeah, what's your kind of thoughts on perfectionism? Like, yeah, how do you look at that as a creative person? That idea of perfectionism.
Yeah, I don't really believe that anything can be perfect. Um, I think that something can be perfect for the moment. I mean, especially I'm thinking about performance now. You know, there's a way of, if you tune into a crowd, you might just feel a way to sing a song or give a speech in that moment that is like, it's the way musicians play together. Sometimes when musicians play together, they know exactly how to fit their tempo and their tone and everything else together in that moment so that it just works. But it doesn't mean that that's the one perfect version of a song. I think that things can be, yeah, perfect for the moment that they're in. But beyond that, I don't think we ever quite get it right. And especially with writing, like it's impossible to actually capture life in a
Hmm.
book. Every book fails, but it's the fact that the book fails that makes writing possible. Because if you could capture it all perfectly, then there would just be one book and that would be it. There'd be no point in writing any more books, right?
Hmm. Connection as well. Do you have any advice on somebody who wants to perform and they want to connect with an audience? How did they go about it?
Hmm. Yeah, I'll say three things. The first is find ways. So each person has to kind of find where their own edge is with this. But I would try to find a way to tell people some of the stuff about yourself that you don't want them to know. Like now, for some people, it could just be doing things like admitting the fact that you're nervous. And that might help an audience relax and be more comfortable with you. Or it could be like telling more embarrassing stories about yourself. And then they relax and they trust you more. Or it might be, yeah, bringing different parts of yourself into whatever you're offering. So for each person, there's an edge where just showing a bit more of themselves is enough of a stretch for them. And so for each person, I would ask yourself, like, what's just a little bit more of myself? A little bit more of myself that feels a bit uncomfortable, but feels safe enough to do. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in order to really connect with an audience, you have to actually pay attention to them. Now, like a lot of speakers and performing artists, they're not really fully present in the room because they're so either stuck inside their nerves or they're so stuck inside their idea of how their performance is supposed to go or whatever else it is that they don't really notice the people they're talking to. So some people will stare, you know, like out over the heads of the crowd, or they will look at the crowd, but they're kind of like their eyes are bouncing around and they don't really look because it's too overwhelming for them. Or they rush through whatever it is they're saying or doing just a bit, again, because they can't handle the intensity of actually being there and having all that attention. Or if you're a singer or whatever, you might be really in the music when you're in the music, but in between songs or when you're talking to people, you still don't really allow yourself to actually be with them fully. So I would practice eye contact. I would practice really paying attention to people. I practice feeling the intensity of that and becoming comfortable with that intensity. And when you do that, you actually end up with so much energy and inspiration inside of yourself that you don't have to try to be alive. You don't have to try to be full of power and passion, because it's actually that connection to the audience and that overwhelming like charge of the moment. When you let that in, it lights you up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess a question I would have there is, how do we not become overwhelmed by the intensity of it? Is there some way where we can become more comfortable with that power?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a practice. It's like doing chin-ups. Like if you've never done a chin-up, maybe just one or even half a one is all you can do, and that's perfect. And then a couple of days later, you do another one, and in time, you can do more and more. So if you're on a stage, or even just in social interactions, say if you feel a bit shy or whatever in social interactions, just practice making a little bit more eye contact each time, and just being a bit more in your body each time. Just noticing your breathing and just really letting yourself feel it a little bit more each time, just enough, just a stretch each time. And then over time, you know, you'll become more and more able to.
Mm. Yeah, finding your edge again. Yeah, just slowly,
Yeah,
bit by bit.
exactly.
Well, for the book again, we'll come back to your memoir. Like, what do you find the most challenging in writing that?
Yeah. The most challenging thing is that it doesn't have a structure. I'm not going from beginning to middle to end. And so, because I have so many different stories and because I have so many different ideas about life, the book could in some way like just keep on multiplying infinitely and become this huge fragmented and like really difficult to follow mess. And so I'm having to keep on finding ways to hold on to some kind of a thread.
So that's the tough part.
That's the tough part for now. Yeah, for sure. Too many ideas, too many stories, and not enough of a sense of how it all fits together.
And how are you approaching that right now to get that trade?
Mm. I'm listening in, I'm looking for what are the themes that keep on emerging. So if I feel really called to tell a particular story from my life, or if I feel really called to focus on a particular myth or a particular nugget of neuroscience, then I ask, how does this connect to everything else I've written so far? I keep asking myself things like, what are the real handful of most important questions in my life? What are the handful of most important lessons? And then if a particular memory or a particular body of knowledge feeds into those, great, it goes into the book. And if it doesn't really relate to any of it, I just leave it aside and maybe it will go into something else.
Hmm. The Celtic mythology, how was that in your story? Was that something you was always fascinated by, or?
Yeah, I've been obsessively reading myths since I was a little kid. Um, there's a couple of particular myths which I see as really being about having the courage to let yourself be seen and heard in the world. And so I'm reading those myths over and over again to try and absorb the wisdom in them. And I can't really say that I fully understand them, but just the process of reading them over and over again and being curious about them and then trying to allow them to percolate in my consciousness. I'm trying to find ways to live them out, even if I'm kind of having to make it up as I go along.
Hmm. Are you trying to connect them with your life as well while you're doing it, or?
Yes.
Okay. So in a way, I guess, does that solidify what you've learned while you're writing that out and figuring that out?
Yeah, it does. It's making the writing of the book become a kind of a personal quest for me, a personal creative quest. Now, that makes it sound like very grand and romantic. It's not really. It's just me living my ordinary life. Um, but in the reading of the myths and the writing of the book, I'm continually confronted with where I'm most alive and inspired in my life and where I'm most stuck and struggling. And so writing the book is making me change my life. And then changing my life is changing what's going into the book. So this is something I'm working with, a bunch of authors right now on their books. And something I think that's really important to realize, the first time you write a book, um, a work of non-fiction this is. If you're writing a memoir, or if you're writing a book about growth or healing, the first time you write it for yourself. So you need to get stuff out of yourself. You need to get chunks of your undigested life experience out onto the page. You need to process the entirety of your existence in a way. I don't want to make that sound too overwhelming, but in some sense, you've got to catch up with yourself, right? In order to make sense of it. So I'm 36 years old. So 36 years of life experience is all trying to come out of me all at once and make it into this one volume. And you have to be able to do that in order to find the book that wants to come. Now, after you've done that, you can take a lot of it away again, because the reader doesn't need to know all that stuff, but it had to be written down in order for the book to arrive. It's like you've got to put up a lot of scaffolding in order to make a building. Mm-hmm. When the building's done, you take the scaffolding away again.
Yeah, that's very useful to know. Yeah, I didn't know that before, but that's very, very useful. I had another question as well, though. It came up there. It's gone again. Do you ever find yourself latching on to ideas and thoughts and stuff, or do you let them come and go as a creative person?
A bit of both. I have too many ideas most of the time. That's my problem.
Yeah.
So I try to write them down, but I sometimes don't.
Yeah. Oh, it's not coming to me again. No. Yeah, no, I enjoyed that, Dave. Enjoyed hearing about your process and the stuff you're doing with spoken word and writing and speaking. It was interesting, like just the difference between flow and speaking and flow and writing. I'd never really thought about that. So
neither had I.
Cool. Okay. Learn something new every day. So
yeah.
So thanks for taking your time. And where would people find you online if they wanted to check out your work?
Yeah, they can go to flowspeaking.com. Talks a little bit about some of the things I offer, but really the main place, if people want to connect with me, they can add me on Facebook and they can follow me on YouTube. And that's where I share a lot of writing and I make some videos now and then as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
And do you have any final message for somebody who wants to become more themselves and get into more of a flow in their life?
Yeah, that's a great question. To come back to the start, I feel the most important thing is we have to allow ourselves to express ourselves no matter how we're feeling and no matter what wants to come. So the best way to write an amazing poem or story is to write a crap one first. And the best way to feel inspired is to let yourself feel uninspired. And the best way to feel confident is to let yourself feel shy. We have to get into a practice of expressing ourselves and allowing ourselves to create stuff, even if it's crap, even if we don't feel like doing it, and even if nothing comes that we can make any sense of. And if we do that often enough, the gold comes. You don't get the gold without the garbage. So waiting to feel inspired or confident before you start creating things consistently, it's like waiting to feel fit and healthy before you start exercising. It doesn't work that way. You have to express yourself regularly and you've got to create things regularly in order to become inspired and confident.
Great message. The many paradoxes of life summed up in there too.
Many paradoxes. Yeah. So just don't wait. Even if can I have another minute?
Yeah. All
right. Okay. Let me just put it like this. Like, say somebody wants to dance or sing or make jokes or whatever it is. If you do it now, today, when you listen to this, whoever you are out there, if you're listening to this now, if you do a dance or a song or a joke today or write a story or start a business, even if it's the worst song or the worst story or the worst business anyone has ever made, you will be better off afterwards for having done it than you were before. And that's because it's only by doing stuff that we make progress. It's only by doing stuff that we get one step further. And sometimes you've got to make the crap business and make the crap song and have the terrible gig in order to get to the good one. So even if for the next year of your life, all you ever came out with was like absolute crap, you would still be much, much better off in a year's time than if you spent all of this time doing nothing because you're afraid. Do the crap stuff today.
Yeah, I like that. No, I agree with that philosophy. It's great stuff. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for taking your time today and sharing your story and everything. So, thanks again.
Thank you, Dennis.
So until next time, have fun and enjoy the process.